A terrified child cried, "Please, mister, my mommy is tied to a rock in the hot sun." Cowboy Ethan Walker rushed into the Arizona desert and found an Apache woman fighting for her life. But after saving her, he discovered the dangerous men who left her there were still watching. What happened next will touch your heart. Subscribe, like, and watch until the end. The summer sun burned fiercely over the rugged Arizona frontier in 1886, turning the desert into a shimmering sea of heat. Cowboy Ethan Walker had been riding home across a lonely trail when he heard something that made him pull sharply on the reins. At first, he thought it was the cry of a wounded animal, but then he heard a child's voice, trembling with fear. "Please, mister, my mommy is tied to a rock in the hot sun. Please help her." Ethan immediately looked toward the rocky hills. A young boy stood there, barefoot and covered in dust, his eyes filled with tears. He seemed frightened, exhausted, and completely alone. Ethan climbed down from his horse and approached him carefully. "Where is your mother?" he asked. The boy pointed toward a narrow canyon. "Please hurry! She can't breathe!" Without wasting another second, Ethan followed the child through the dusty trail. The path was steep and covered with sharp stones, but the cowboy pushed forward as quickly as he could. As they moved deeper into the canyon, Ethan noticed strange footprints in the sand. Several horses had passed through recently. Something about the sight made him uneasy. When they finally reached the other side of a large canyon wall, Ethan stopped in shock. There, beneath the merciless Arizona sun, was an Apache woman tied tightly to a large rock. Thick ropes wrapped around her wrists and ankles, holding her completely helpless. Her long dark hair had fallen across her face, and her skin was pale from the unbearable heat. She was barely conscious. Ethan immediately rushed toward her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" The woman slowly opened her eyes, but she was too weak to answer. Her lips were dry and her breathing was shallow. Ethan looked at the ropes and realized they had been tied by someone who wanted to make certain she could not escape. Anger flashed across his face, but he knew there was no time to waste. He pulled out his hunting knife and began cutting through the thick rope. "Hold on," he whispered. "I'm going to get you out of here." The boy stood nearby, watching anxiously. "Please save my mommy," he begged. "I will," Ethan promised. "I won't leave her here." The rope finally snapped. Ethan freed the woman's wrists and then cut the bindings around her ankles. She collapsed forward, but Ethan caught her before she hit the ground. Carefully, he carried her toward a nearby patch of shade beneath a rocky ledge. The boy immediately ran after them. Ethan removed his canteen and gave the woman a small amount of water. "Slowly," he warned. "Don't drink too fast." She took a few weak sips, then closed her eyes. Ethan poured some water onto a cloth and gently placed it against her forehead. After several moments, the woman finally opened her eyes again. "My name is Ayanna," she whispered. Ethan nodded. "I'm Ethan Walker." Ayanna stared at him with confusion and fear. She had clearly expected cruelty from strangers, perhaps because whoever had tied her there had treated her as if her life meant nothing. But this cowboy had risked his own safety to save her. Ethan noticed bruises around her wrists and immediately understood that she had been held captive for some time. "Who did this to you?" he asked. Ayanna looked toward the canyon entrance. Her expression suddenly changed. Fear returned to her eyes. She shook her head and whispered, "They will come back." Ethan glanced at the boy. "Who will come back?" Before Ayanna could answer, the boy moved closer to his mother. "Bad men," he said quietly. "They took us from our camp." Ethan's hand slowly moved toward his revolver. He scanned the surrounding cliffs, suddenly aware of how silent the canyon had become. Ayanna tried to sit up, but Ethan gently stopped her. "You need to rest." She looked directly into his eyes. "You don't understand. If they find us, they will kill you too." Ethan gave a calm but determined reply. Then they better come prepared. For the first time, a faint sense of hope appeared in Ayana's exhausted eyes, but just as Ethan helped her stand, something caught his attention. On a distant ridge, barely visible through the heat waves, a dark figure stood beside a horse. Ethan froze. The figure disappeared behind the rocks almost instantly. Ethan knew it wasn't his imagination. Someone had been watching them. He quickly helped Ayana and her son move toward his horse. "We need to leave," he said. Ayana looked at him nervously. "Where?" Ethan looked toward the open desert, then toward the trail leading to his ranch. Somewhere safe. But as Ethan mounted his horse, he noticed fresh hoofprints leading away from the canyon. Whoever had been watching them was already moving, and Ethan knew they would not stop until they found Ayana again. The cowboy tightened his grip on the reins and made a silent promise to himself. No matter who was coming, he would not allow them to take Ayana back. Ethan quickly helped Ayana onto his horse while her young son walked beside them, holding tightly to the saddle whenever the uneven trail made the horse stumble. The sun was beginning to sink behind the distant Arizona mountains, painting the desert sky with shades of orange and gold. Ethan kept looking over his shoulder, worried that the men who had tied Ayana to the rock might still be nearby. Every few minutes, he studied the surrounding hills, searching for movement. Among the rocks, Ayana was weak and exhausted, but she remained alert. Her son, whom she called Nita, stayed close to her mother, his small face still filled with fear. Ethan tried to reassure him. "We're almost there," he said. "My ranch is not far. You'll have a safe place to rest tonight." The boy nodded but said nothing. After nearly an hour of riding, Ethan's remote ranch finally appeared in the distance. It was a modest wooden cabin surrounded by a small corral, a water well, and a few scattered trees that offered precious shade from the desert heat. Ethan helped Ayana down from the horse and guided her inside. The moment she entered the cabin, she seemed overwhelmed by the simple comfort of the place. There was a bed, a table, a fireplace, and enough food to survive several days. Ethan brought her clean water and prepared a warm meal while Nita sat quietly near his mother. Ayana ate slowly, still suspicious of everything around her. Ethan noticed her hesitation, but did not pressure her. He understood that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. Later that evening, after Ayana had rested for several hours, Ethan sat across the table from her. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft crackling of the fire. Finally, Nita began to speak. His voice trembled as he explained what had happened. Their Apache camp had been attacked by a group of armed men several days earlier. The attackers had taken supplies, frightened the families, and captured Ayana when she tried to protect the children. Nita had managed to escape into the hills, but his mother had been taken away. He had searched for her until he found her tied to the rock. "They said nobody would find her," Nita whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked at Ayana, whose eyes were fixed on the fire. She had remained silent, but the pain in her expression told Ethan that every word was true. "Do you know who these men are?" Ethan asked. Ayana slowly shook her head. "They don't belong to one group," she replied. "They are hunters of people. They take what they want, and they leave death behind." Ethan looked toward the dark window. He knew the danger had not ended when he cut the ropes. If those men discovered that Ayana was alive, they might come looking for her. That night, Ethan barely slept. He kept his revolver beside his bed and listened to every sound outside. Just before sunrise, his horse suddenly began making nervous noises in the corral. Ethan immediately rose and stepped outside. The first light of morning revealed something disturbing. Fresh horse tracks surrounded the edge of his property. Someone had been there during the night. Ethan followed the tracks for a short distance before stopping. He could see where several riders had waited near the trees. His heart sank. They had found him. Ethan returned to the cabin and reached for his rifle. Ayana immediately noticed the weapon. "No," she said firmly. Ethan looked at her. "They were here last night." "I know," she replied. "But if you fight them here, they will burn your ranch and kill anyone who stands in their way." Ethan lowered the rifle slightly. Ayana continued, "We need to leave before they return." Ethan realized she was right. He had spent his entire life believing that courage meant standing your ground, but sometimes courage meant knowing when to walk away. Together, they made a plan. Ethan would take Ayana and Nita to the nearest sheriff's office, where they could give an official statement. At the same time, Ayana wanted someone to warn her people that the attackers might return to the area. Ethan saddled his horses, while Ayana prepared what little she had. Before leaving, Ethan looked around his ranch. He knew there was a chance he might never see it again, but he also knew that protecting Ayana and her son was more important. As they rode away, the morning sun rose over the desert. Ayana sat quietly on the horse, holding Nita close. After some distance, she turned and looked back at Ethan. "Why did you help me?" she finally asked. Ethan seemed surprised by the question. "Because you needed help," he answered simply. "That's all." Ayana studied his face. She had known men who had demanded something in return for kindness. Ethan had asked for nothing. He had risked his life, shared his home, and now placed himself in danger simply because he believed it was the right thing to do. Ayana turned toward the road again, but a quiet smile appeared on her face. For Ethan, his actions were nothing more than doing what any decent man should do, but for Ayana, his kindness meant something much greater. It reminded her that even in a world filled with fear, cruelty, and betrayal, there were still people capable of compassion. And as they disappeared into the vast Arizona wilderness, neither of them knew that this journey would change their lives forever.